This story's pretty detailed, so I'm gonna get right into it. Only relevant details, though. I'm 22 years old, freshly graduated from college. Since I was maybe 3 or 4, my family's lived in a 3-story home in a relatively nice area. If you're picturing the quintessential suburban neighborhood, you've got the right idea. As for the layout of the house, this is all you need to know. My bedroom, which is on the 2nd floor, has a window that faces the street, and the only window in my dad's home office, which is on the 3rd floor, also faces the street. That's it. The reason I'm writing this is because after the events of last week, I'm now 100% convinced something sinister is happening to my family for some inexplicable reason I can't even begin to conceive of. And if I'm connecting the dots correctly, which I'm pretty sure I am, it's been going on for years. This first relevant thing happened so long ago that I don't even remember how old I was, but I was young enough to still be in middle school, so it had to have been at least 10 years ago. It was either a Saturday or a Sunday since I didn't have school, and as I was walking downstairs for breakfast, I overheard my parents talking in the kitchen. I didn't catch much of the conversation, but I was able to hear my dad talking about how something had happened again, and it must have been at least a little concerning judging by the tone he was using. My parents didn't tell me what was going on when I asked them about it. They actually didn't tell me directly for over a year afterwards, but I learned the real story a few days later from my older brother. My dad's a lawyer and often works into the night whenever he's pressured to finish something that doesn't get done at the office, and that's what he was doing until about 2 a.m. the night before I overheard him talking to my mom about the incident. According to my dad, he was working away at his desk at around midnight when he noticed a Chevy Suburban drive down the street at like 5 miles per hour. That's not an exaggeration. He claims to this day that the car looked like it was crawling down the street, as if someone had taken their foot off both the gas and the brake and was just letting the car idle forward. My dad didn't think much of it until he saw the exact same car drive back down the street, only this time in the opposite direction. And then, even more strangely, the car actually parked across the street, right in front of our house. My dad didn't take his eye off the car for a good few minutes straight, waiting to see whether someone would get out of the car or if it would drive off. But neither happened. The car just sat there. My dad didn't have the time or the patience to devote the rest of the night to watching the car, so he went back to work, glancing out the window every so often out of curiosity. But nothing happened for hours. He swore no one ever got out of the car, since he would have noticed movement out the window if they had. Eventually, he fell asleep at his desk around 2 a.m. without even completing his work. But here's the crazy part. When he woke up around 5:30, the car was still there in the exact same spot. What happened while he was asleep remains a mystery, but my dad said he was so shocked to see the car still there when he woke up, he thought he was dreaming. The car ended up leaving before sunrise, and even after finishing his work, my dad was so unsettled he couldn't sleep. I would eventually learn that this wasn't the first instance of something similar happening, that my dad had seen cars drive back and forth on our street late at night before, but it was definitely the strangest. No one in the family really thought anything of it for several years though. It was most likely just someone sleeping in a very coincidental spot, and at the very worst, it was someone driving around random nice neighborhoods and casing houses. Fast forward a few years. I'm 15 now, a sophomore in high school. I remember the second occurrence much more distinctly, partly because it was more recent and partly because it actually happened to me. I was up late making beats in my room, something I did quite often during that time in my life. Like I said earlier, my room has a window that faces the street, which I can always see out of since my desk is right in front of it. I was vibing out with my headphones in when something from outside my bedroom window caught my eye. It was a little flicker of light, definitely unnatural and definitely not my imagination. I diverted my attention to the window and saw the strangest, most unsettling thing. There was a squadron of cars, at least 3 of them. They were driving down the street at a slow speed. That by itself doesn't sound so bad, but I quickly realized that the people in the cars were shining flashlights at houses. That's where the flicker of light had been. I kept watching in this state of confused angst as whoever was in the first car swept their flashlight beam across the house next to mine. Then they started shining their light at my house, and I actually ducked down underneath my windowsill when I realized the beam was about to sweep right past my window. Not 2 seconds after ducking down, I watched the flashlight beam illuminate my ceiling for a couple seconds before everything went dark again. I waited a good 20 seconds before re-emerging, and by the time I did, the cars were much further down the street. I watched as they got to the end of the street and turned off. You can probably imagine how I was feeling in that moment. It was tough to get much sleep after that. I obviously told my parents about it the next morning, and as a family, we collectively agreed that it was a group of thugs casing houses, probably looking for ones with no one home that would make easy targets for a home intrusion. My dad installed a Ring camera after that, and he even put some security cameras with motion lights in our backyard. I can't remember for sure, but I think my parents might have talked to a few of our neighbors to see if anyone had experienced something similar. A couple years later, the next thing happened. While doing some landscaping in our backyard, one of the contractors my dad had hired claimed to have found a small hidden camera tucked into one of the bushes near the fence. It was tiny, no bigger than a car key, but it was definitely a camera. It was battery powered, and the battery had long since died. It didn't have a SIM card or any memory card inside, which meant it wasn't storing anything locally or using cellular data. But that didn't rule out the possibility that it had been streaming footage to an external device nearby while it was active. My dad said the most likely explanation was that someone had been parked close enough to receive a live feed until the battery gave out. Why anyone would go through the trouble of hiding something like that on our property and then just leave it behind was a complete mystery to us, but it definitely wasn't the kind of thing that you stumble across by accident. As furious as my dad was, he couldn't figure out when or who had placed it there, even after combing through the last few months of security camera footage, or at least everything the thing had recorded and stored. I was convinced that one of my friends had been pranking us, but even after pestering all of them, no one fessed up to placing that camera there. My parents were really worried we were being targeted, and they even reported everything to the police, but the home security they had already installed was pretty top-notch, so it wasn't like they could upgrade things much. Nothing happened for a little while after that. It wasn't like there was this cloud hanging over our heads. We all just kind of moved on with our lives the way most people probably would. The next thing worth mentioning happened a few years after we discovered the camera. Our immediate next-door neighbors moved away, and their house was re-inhabited super quickly, like it was only vacant for a few weeks at most. That's not exactly the most unusual thing. My neighborhood has always been a very desirable place for families to live. However, I noticed pretty quickly that the people who moved in weren't parents, just a youngish couple with no children. I remember finding that odd considering the size of the house, but I assumed maybe they were planning on starting a family, or maybe they just wanted a big place all to themselves. On several occasions after they moved in though, I caught them looking into our yard through their top floor window, always at strange hours, either really early in the morning or really late at night. At first, I figured they had a workstation or office up there like my dad, and they were just seated right in front of the window, but then I noticed they were always standing, which eliminated the desk hypothesis. I knew I was just being paranoid, but I'm a pretty observant person by nature, so if someone's gonna do something out of the ordinary, I'm gonna notice it. Either way, I didn't think much of it. Just found it mildly amusing that our neighbors seemed fascinated with the layout of our yard or whatever else it was that they were always looking at. One night, while walking my dog on the street, I couldn't help but notice my neighbors in their kitchen through their big bay window. They were sitting at a table, and for the first time since they had moved in, there was a third person with them. The guy had really distinctive features. He was fully bald, really muscular, and had the thickest eyebrows I'd ever seen. The three of them, he and the couple, were just sitting and talking at the table, nothing unusual. But as if they noticed me looking, the woman swiftly walked over to the window and pulled the curtains over it. She didn't actually look out the window at me, none of them did, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she shut the curtains because somehow she knew I was watching. Either way, I didn't forget about the man that had been with them. His face was just so distinctive. I don't really know what else to say. Okay, so now that you've made it this far, you're probably thinking that I'm some paranoid schizophrenic. I mean, that's what I'd be thinking too, but I would never in a million years be sending the story in if what happened next didn't happen. Like I said in the beginning, this happened last week, so about another few years after the last thing I talked about. A few weeks ago, my family took a trip to Paris. My older brother had been dating his girlfriend for years, and everyone was pretty much expecting him to propose while we were there because we were going with her family too. A few days into the trip, we were at this random bar. Everyone was there, me, my parents, my brothers, his girlfriend, and her parents. We were sitting in a booth enjoying a few drinks and having some good conversation. I was maybe halfway through my drink, zoning out of the conversation, when I happened to glance across the room. There was this guy sitting alone in a booth, just casually sipping his drink and looking around the room. Something about him seemed familiar, but I couldn't immediately place where I'd seen him before. But then, like a light switch had been turned on, I realized it was that man who I'd seen at my neighbor's kitchen table years ago. There was no way. I didn't want to believe it. What were the chances this random guy from my neighborhood would be in the exact same bar as my family in a foreign country, no less? I tried to convince myself it was a coincidence, but the more I stared, the more certain I became that it was him. Then he caught me looking at him. We locked eyes for what felt like forever, but was probably only a few seconds. He knew, I knew, and he knew I knew. I could feel it. Then, without finishing his drink or paying his bill, he got up and walked out of sight. I immediately excused myself from the table and tried to follow him, but I couldn't figure out where he had gone. I ended up just sitting back down at the table, trying to suppress the nasty feeling I had. Telling myself that the guy just happened to be on vacation the same time we were was the only way I could continue my night with my sanity. A few days later, we were doing some typical touristy stuff. It was broad daylight, and we were just walking around the city when I saw him again, that same guy. I can't understate how shocking it was. If the first instance had just been a coincidence, this completely shattered that theory. He was standing maybe 50 feet from us, snapping pictures with a professional-looking camera. I couldn't tell for sure, but it kinda seemed like the camera was pointed in our direction, even though there was a famous monument behind us. I watched as he then turned a corner and disappeared out of sight. I finally told my parents about what was going on. I gave them every little detail and assured them I wasn't going crazy. My parents actually believed me, my dad especially, and he even suggested cutting the trip short. We didn't end up doing that, but the rest of the vacation was awful. When we finally got home, my dad checked as much security footage as was stored, but didn't find anything. I really don't know what to make of all of this. I don't know what these people want from us, or who they even are, but now I'm convinced they've been watching us for over a decade, which sounds insane, and I only have reason to believe things are going to escalate from here. This happened close to 20 years ago, back when I was 15. My parents were in the midst of a really ugly divorce at the time, and my mom thought it would be a good idea for me to spend a few weeks with my great aunt Lucy in upstate Vermont while they sorted out the legal stuff. I wasn't thrilled about being shipped off to some relative I barely knew, but I didn't have much choice. Aunt Lucy lived in this massive Victorian house that had been converted into apartments sometime in the 60s. She owned the whole building and rented out the top 2 floors to tenants, while she lived alone in the sprawling first floor unit. The place was beautiful in a very specific old-fashioned way. High ceilings, original hardwood floors, intricate moldings around every doorframe, movie-type stuff like that. What struck me as odd right away was that Aunt Lucy seemed to avoid certain parts of her own apartment. She had this huge master bedroom with tall windows and beautiful antique furniture, but she slept in a small den off the living room instead. That was actually one of the things I asked her about, to which she just replied that the main bedroom got too much morning light. I then stupidly asked if I could sleep in there then, to which she just glared at me disapprovingly. You gotta remember that things were a little different back then, and respecting your elders was practically law. So after that interaction, I held my tongue, not wanting to upset her further. The first few nights I was there, I kept hearing what sounded like someone walking around in the apartment above us. I figured it was just one of the tenants, maybe someone who worked late shifts. But the weird thing was how methodical the walking sounded, back and forth, like someone pacing the length of the apartment. After about a week of this, I couldn't keep things to myself and mentioned it to Aunt Lucy over breakfast. She again gave me this strange expression and said the second floor had been vacant for over a month. I insisted that I'd been hearing someone walking around up there every night, but she just shook her head and told me I was just hearing the building settling. Her explanation didn't make sense, but I wasn't about to argue. The next morning, I told Aunt Lucy I wanted to see the vacant apartment. She seemed reluctant, but I kept pressing, and eventually she agreed. Just like she said, the second floor was completely empty, but as we walked through the rooms together, I saw something that immediately validated what I'd been hearing. There were fresh scuff marks on the hardwood floors, like someone had been walking the same path over and over. The marks formed a clear pattern from the front of the apartment to the back, exactly matching the route the footsteps seemed to make each night. When I pointed this out, Aunt Lucy said the marks were probably from the previous tenants, but they looked too recent for that. I told her this, but she just dismissed me like I was some babbling child. That evening, she suggested we watch a movie together, which we'd never done before. As it got later, the footsteps from upstairs started up again. I looked at Aunt Lucy, expecting her to finally acknowledge what we were hearing, but instead, she just turned the volume up and pretended like nothing was happening. I was stunned. My first thought was Aunt Lucy knew exactly what was going on and just didn't want to tell me. The next day, I called my mom and mentioned the situation, and you know what's crazy? Even my mom seemed to know what was going on. She told me not to bring up the footsteps with Aunt Lucy anymore, and that it was, quote, a sensitive topic. One night near the end of my visit, I woke up around 2 a.m. needing to use the bathroom. As I was walking back to my room, I glanced toward the staircase that led up to the second floor. The door at the bottom was slightly ajar, and I could have sworn I saw a faint light moving around up there, like someone was walking with a flashlight. I immediately went to bed and didn't mention it to Aunt Lucy. I just wanted to get the hell out of there. If it hadn't been for that night the two of us watched a movie, I would have assumed Aunt Lucy was causing the footsteps, but that was impossible. My mom refused to explain things to me when I got back home, and this actually caused quite the rift between the two of us. Years later, I found out through a cousin that Aunt Lucy had sold the building and moved to Florida. According to my cousin, there had been some kind of incident in the apartment back in the 90s. Someone had died there under unclear circumstances, and the family had tried to keep it quiet. That was also around the time Aunt Lucy had inherited the building. I've never believed in ghosts. I don't say that to sound dismissive or close-minded. I just genuinely don't. I think that's a pretty dumb way to interpret things you don't understand, to be frank. So when I think back on what I experienced in that house, I always find myself searching for some other explanation. Maybe Aunt Lucy was sheltering someone up there, a relative in trouble, or someone who needed to stay hidden. Or maybe she was being blackmailed, forced to let someone live in her building without anyone knowing. Maybe the incident my cousin mentioned wasn't as closed as the family wanted to believe, and whoever was responsible still had some kind of hold over her. Or maybe the entire thing was completely made up, and my cousin was needlessly gossiping. I really don't know. What I do know is that my mom knows something, and I'll never forgive her for withholding that information from me. I think this is just one of those things that will never have an explanation.
My family and I are probably the biggest skeptics in the world, which is why I can't explain what happened that day. I went downstairs and my brother was in the kitchen. I grabbed a water and asked him if he believed in ghosts. He shook his head, but told me a story about something that he thinks may seem paranormal. Then I looked at him and asked, "Did you ever try to scare me when I came home from school?" I planned on asking that question to follow with my story. "Once," he said. Somehow that calmed me down, and I wasn't going to bring anything else up because I thought it was some kind of closure. He continued by saying, "But all I did was shoot a Nerf gun bullet at you while you were on the computer." I wish he didn't say that. That wasn't what happened to me in the 7th grade. I do remember him shooting a Nerf gun at me, but it felt inferior to what I was about to tell him. I continued to speak with him about the story that follows. It happened in middle school when I was in 7th grade and recently started off the new year. I came home that day and went to my bedroom where I sat in my bed and put in earbuds to watch YouTube videos. My mom had called me to tell me that my brother would be gone or would be leaving soon to go to a friend's house. My parents also worked late, which means I would be home alone. I was a very quiet kid when no one was around because I always had this fear that there could be someone in the house with me. If I didn't make much noise, then they couldn't find me, right? Who knew that suspicion could have possibly been true? I paused my YouTube video and headed to the bathroom. My house has a very weird layout. I'll try to explain what the important parts of this story looked like. If you were in my bathroom facing the door, you could step out and take a left, and my brother's room would be to your right at the end of the hallway, which is a short hallway. If you went right, you would reach the stairway that went down and stopped because there was a platform in the middle, and then you would walk in the same direction you came to get lower. The stairway leads to our main entrance of the house. We also have an alarm activated. If any doors or windows are opened, a box will immediately say which door has been used. I was in the bathroom and right about to flush the toilet when I heard a loud thud come from my brother's room. I assumed that he must be about to leave for his friend's house, so I flushed the toilet and got up to wash my hands. There were no more noises. The house felt still, but I felt like I was being listened to. I turned off the sink and walked over to the bathroom door to lock it. Something felt wrong. My stomach started to ache from fear. I felt like I was just being paranoid, but I also couldn't shake that weird feeling in my gut. So I waited for another noise. I didn't have my phone on me, so I couldn't text my brother. We had a house phone in there, but it made loud noises when you dialed, so I didn't want to risk it. Then I heard talking, which was definitely coming from my brother's room, but that was not my brother talking, and it couldn't have been my dad. The muttering was deep and low. It sent shivers down my spine. I could tell it was a voice because of the distinction of an S or a T, but I couldn't understand what it was saying. Then there was a slow pounding noise that started getting closer to me. It came out of my brother's room and nailed its way towards the bathroom door. It stopped dead in its tracks right at the door. I threw myself away from the door near the window, hoping that if it busted in, I could get a way to leave. I couldn't fight whoever it was since I was a weak 7th grader, so that was out of the question. I covered my mouth to keep from breathing loudly in case they didn't know I was in the bathroom. Then they continued to walk. I could hear them making their way to the stairway, and then it stopped. I heard a loud crashing noise from what I thought was the middle platform of the stairs, and then again at the bottom. Then the muttering stopped, and the loud pounding made its way to the door. I heard the door open and close, and I heard the alarm go off for the door as well. I didn't know if it was safe or not, so I made my way to the door and rested my hand on the doorknob, still covering my mouth. To the left of me towards the ground is a laundry chute that led to our laundry room. If someone were to get from the main floor to the laundry room, it would definitely take over 30 seconds. But about 10 seconds after the door opened and closed, a vicious jabbing noise pounded at the small laundry chute door. I stood there in awe, not sure what to do. It sounded like someone took the end of a broom and reached up there to stab at the door. I watched as the pounding of the door vibrated the small laundry chute door, hoping that it wouldn't bust open. Then it ended. I waited in the bathroom for what seemed like an eternity, and then quietly crept to my room to call my parents. No one picked up, so I waited for them to get home and held my door handle to make sure no one could get in, since I didn't have a lock on it. When my parents got home, they didn't believe me. Soon after, my brother arrived, and he doubted me as well. Telling this again to my brother made his mouth drop. He continued to tell me that he used to hear things come from the attic that used to open up in his bedroom. I will honestly never forget that day. Me and my brother can't figure out who or what that was, and I try not to think too hard about it either. I still don't quite know what happened, and I may never know, but I want to. My name's Alyssa. I was 16 years old at the time, living with my mom in a crappy Bronx, New York apartment. Living in the Bronx was definitely an experience, not a good one. Always sketchy characters around, usually scary to walk alone at night, small apartment, and creepy neighbors. I don't mean that as an understatement. Our apartment was the second to last one in a hall on the 7th floor, and our neighbor, the owner of the last apartment in the hall, seemed to always be sitting outside his door, sitting on the windowsill. He would always make a point of looking at me when I entered the apartment, even when I would be with my mom. My mom told me to stay away from that man. We never even knew his name. He was a black man in his 60s, very little hair left, but his remaining hair was gray. He always had the same emotionless expression on his face when he looked at me, and then one day, it started. Every time I would see him in the hall, he would say hi to me, but he'd call me by my name to make it even creepier. I wasn't exactly sure how he got my name, but I never asked. There was one night that my mom was working the night shift, so I'd be home alone all night. I came home at like 9 p.m., and the neighbor was as usual sitting on that windowsill as if he didn't have anything going on in his life. As I unlocked the door, this time instead of saying hi to me, he asked me if my mom was working tonight. Here's where I look back and cringe because of my own stupidity, because I foolishly nodded yes. He didn't say anything after that. He just slowly nodded his head. I didn't say anything else either. I simply walked inside and shut the door. I had enough of his creepy ass for one night. Basically, after getting home, I just washed up a little bit. I had a snack, did laundry, and took a shower. As I was in the shower, I heard a weird rumbling noise. It was a pretty concerning noise, but I couldn't even begin to try and pin out what it could have been. I got out of the shower after hearing it because I was concerned someone might have been in the apartment. I heard a similar noise outside of the bathroom. It seemed to come from my bedroom. I threw on the clothes I had in the bathroom and searched my entire room. I couldn't find a person, but while searching my room, I saw an ever so tiny hole in the wall. I got closer to feel it and look at it. Then I got down on my knees to look through it, and when I saw what was on the other side, I fell backwards because of how scared I was of what I saw. It was someone's eye. Someone was actually looking through that hole from the other side. Then I realized this wall separated our apartment from the creepy neighbor's apartment. Then I had a sudden realization of what that sound I heard in the bathroom must have been. I ran back to the shower and felt all around the wall until I found another hole, identical in size from the one in my room. The neighbor drilled these two holes, maybe even more, to spy on me. I called my mom and told her, and as I was on the phone with her, there were knocks on the apartment door. It was the neighbor, and he kept yelling, "Open the door right now, I didn't drill those holes." My mom freaked out and told me to call the cops, and she'd try to get home ASAP. One good thing about the Bronx, police response time is fast, and there were cops at my apartment door in under 5 minutes. My mom was home half an hour later. My mom pressed charges for stalking, invasion of privacy, and criminal mischief. The apartment building also evicted the man and patched up the holes at the man's expense. I'll never forget the time my friend Hal and I went camping. Hal is an Eagle Scout and nature lover, so he's always going out on these camping trips. One time I decided to come along and see what it was about. He went with his at-the-time girlfriend Maya. I received a last-minute invitation. We carpooled together and arrived to the destination 3 hours later. Hal doesn't believe in going to campsites because it doesn't give the real camping experience when you're surrounded by other people, so he took us to some random dirt trail off some dead road that he seemed to know about. He drove down this dirt road in the woods for a couple minutes until he seemed to be content with where we were. Then he put the car in park. It was such an inconspicuous place to stop that I wasn't even aware at first that we were getting out there. Hal unloaded the trunk. Most of the stuff we brought consisted of tents, sleeping bags, food, toilet paper, and first aid equipment. Hal said he usually packed a lot lighter, but was making this an easy trip for Maya and I, whatever that meant. Once we found a good place to set up camp, Hal basically assigned us tasks. Setting up a tent was one thing I knew how to do, so Hal told me to set up the 2 tents. Maya stayed behind with me and kind of helped with the tents while also unpacking some of the supplies. Hal went off to find dry firewood. He would come back every so often with a couple pieces of wood. Nightfall came quicker than expected. Thankfully, Hal had collected enough wood by then to start a nice fire, and the tents were pitched. We sat by the fire, drinking and reminiscing about old memories, most of which Maya was not in the picture for. I imagine she got tired of hearing our drunken, nonsensical stories because she went to her tent before Hal and I. So Hal and I stayed up for a little while longer, now being a bit quieter and keeping the laughter to a minimum as a courtesy to Maya. I finished my last beer, and I was definitely feeling it by then. We chatted for a bit more, until Hal told me to shh and listened. I heard it too. There was walking out in the distance, beyond the area at which the fire lit up. Hal assured me it was likely a deer. When I naively asked what if it's a bear, he reassured me that a bear would not come this close to a campfire or the sound of people. I asked him if he was sure about that. He didn't answer though. The footsteps seemed to be going in circles, getting ever so slightly louder with each passing minute. When the footsteps got close enough, we started to hear a disturbing noise. It was like a clicking, growling type of noise. "Is that a wolf?" I whispered. Hal didn't answer. He just motioned for me to get into the tent. I did what he said. I got into the tent that I pitched for myself, and I believe Hal got into the tent that I pitched for he and Maya. The clicking noise outside was getting more and more clear, and it increasingly became obvious it was not the sound of a wolf, or a bear, or any kind of animal I could imagine. It didn't even sound like something of this planet. The light from the fire outside cast an eerie glow onto the walls of the tent, and I had to cover my mouth so that I wouldn't scream when I saw the shadow on the tent walls of some horrific, huge, bipedal thing walking past my tent. The footsteps were so slow, but so heavy. It moved away from my tent towards the direction of Hal and Maya's tent. The next thing I remember, besides waiting in absolute horror, was Maya's scream. She screamed as if something were about to kill her. I didn't know what was happening, but I heard Hal screaming outside, "Run," over and over. I heard the two of them hurrying away outside, so I rushed outside and followed. We ran in the pitch black, no flashlights, nothing, and yet we still knew we were being chased by something. Footsteps followed close behind me since I was in the back. By some miracle, Hal managed to lead us right to the car, and without looking back, we all got into our respective seats, and Hal floored it down the trail. Hal drove down the dirt trail for about half a minute before we came to a dead end. He had to somehow turn this pickup truck around now, in this dark forest, not too far from where we were being chased. I urged him to turn off the lights so that whatever was chasing us wouldn't see us. He insisted he needed the lights on though so that he wouldn't hit any trees trying to turn the truck around. He shifted from drive to reverse, over and over. Meanwhile, I sat in the back seat biting my nails and clenching my teeth, looking around the woods outside, terrified that I might see that thing from our campsite. At long last, Hal got the truck completely turned around, and he once again stepped on it to get us out of that forest. We left everything at that campsite, at least $100 worth of equipment, but there was zero chance of us ever going back there. What caused Maya to scream was heavy breathing and something pushing into their tent, trying to rip it open. Hal still says he's never heard or seen anything like that in his life. He still has no idea what it could have been, but it definitely walked on two legs. How do we know it wasn't a person, you might ask? Simply because of its size and the noises it made. I think everyone has one truly horrific, unexplainable experience in their lives, and this was ours.